The rain hammered against the wooden door like angry fists demanding entry. Margaret stood on the porch of the last house in town, her soaked dress clinging to her round frame, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She had knocked on 17 doors that day. 17 rejections. 17 variations of the same cruel dismissal. This was her final chance before nightfall swallowed the valley whole. She raised her trembling hand and knocked 3 times. The sound echoed hollow in the storm. For a long moment, nothing happened. Margaret closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to a God she wasn't sure listened anymore. Then the door swung open, and warm lamplight spilled across the threshold. A man stood before her, tall and weathered, with shadows carved deep beneath his eyes. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and exhaustion seemed to pour from every inch of him. But what caught Margaret's attention was the infant cradled awkwardly in his arms, wailing with the desperate fury only a hungry baby could muster. "Please, sir," Margaret began, her voice breaking. "I need work. Any work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend gardens. I'll sleep in the barn if I must. I just need a place to stay and a little food." The man's eyes swept over her, taking in her size, her worn clothing, the desperation painted across her features. His expression hardened into something she had seen too many times that day. Disgust mixed with dismissal. Her stomach twisted into knots. "I'm sorry," he said flatly, already beginning to close the door. "I can't help you." The baby's cries grew more frantic, and Margaret watched the man's jaw clench as he tried to soothe the child with clumsy, inexperienced movements. Something inside her shifted. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about a baby who needed care, about a man drowning in grief and responsibility he didn't know how to carry. "Sir, wait," she called out, her voice stronger now. "I see your hands are full. I see you're struggling. Nobody wants a fat girl, sir, I know that. I've heard it all day from every door I've knocked on. But I can tend the baby. I raised my 6 younger siblings after my mother died. I know how to feed an infant, how to calm them, how to keep them healthy. Your child needs help, and I can give it." The man froze, his hand still on the door. The baby continued to scream, and Margaret saw something crack in his hardened expression. He looked down at the infant, then back at her, and for the first time, his eyes held something other than judgment. They held desperation that matched her own. "My wife died 3 days ago," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Fever took her fast. I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't slept. The baby won't stop crying. I've tried everything, but nothing works. My mother lives 2 towns away, and the roads are washed out from the rain. Everyone else has their own families to tend." Margaret stepped closer, rain streaming down her face. "Let me help. Please. I'm not asking for charity. I'll earn my keep. Just give me a chance." The man stared at her for what felt like an eternity. The baby's cries filled the silence between them, desperate and plaintive. Finally, he stepped back and opened the door wider. The lamplight grew brighter, warmer, more welcoming. "Then stay," he said simply. Margaret stepped across the threshold into the warmth, and the door closed behind her, shutting out the storm and the cruelty of the world beyond. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, she had shelter. Tonight, she had purpose. And the baby in the man's arms needed her. The house smelled of unwashed dishes and despair. Margaret's eyes adjusted to the dim lamplight as she took in her surroundings. Dirty plates were stacked in the corner, baby blankets lay scattered across the furniture, and the hearth held nothing but cold ashes. The man stood in the center of the chaos, still holding the screaming infant, looking utterly lost. "My name is Thomas Brennan," he said over the noise. "This is Emma. She's 4 months old. I don't know what's wrong with her. She won't eat, won't sleep. I'm failing her already, and her mother's barely cold in the ground." Margaret shook off her soaked shawl and moved toward them with steady purpose. "I'm Margaret Hayes, Mr. Brennan. May I hold her?" Thomas hesitated for only a second before transferring the baby into Margaret's waiting arms. The moment Emma settled against Margaret's chest, something remarkable happened. The infant's cries softened, then quieted to whimpers. Margaret began to sway gently, humming a low melody her own mother had once sung. "When did she last eat?" Margaret asked, her fingers expertly checking the baby's diaper, feeling her forehead for fever. "Hours ago. Maybe 6? I lost track. She took a little milk but spit most of it back up. I thought maybe she was sick, like her mother was, and his voice cracked. I can't lose her too." Margaret's heart ached for this broken man, but she kept her focus on the child. "She's not sick," Mr. Brennan. Look at her eyes. They're clear and bright. Feel her skin. No fever. She's hungry and uncomfortable, and she knows you're afraid. Babies sense these things. They feel everything we feel. She moved toward the kitchen, still cradling Emma. Do you have milk? Clean bottles? Warm water? Thomas followed her like a shadow. Yes, the neighbor brought some this morning. And bottles. But Emma won't take them from me. I've tried everything. Margaret surveyed the filthy kitchen and made quick decisions. First, we need to clean one of these bottles properly. Babies get stomach troubles from dirty things. Then we need to warm the milk just right, not too hot, not too cold. And most importantly, we need to feed her while staying calm ourselves. Fear passes through our hands into theirs. She handed Emma back to Thomas while she worked, talking him through each step. Boil water, wash the bottle thoroughly, test the milk temperature on her wrist. Thomas watched her with an intensity that made Margaret self-conscious, but she pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about her discomfort. This was about keeping a motherless baby alive. When the bottle was ready, Margaret settled into the rocking chair by the cold hearth, positioning Emma in her arms at just the right angle. She touched the nipple to the baby's lips, and after a moment's resistance, Emma began to drink. The room fell silent except for the sound of the baby feeding and the rain pattering against the windows. Thomas sank into the chair across from them, his whole body seeming to collapse inward. How did you do that? I've been trying for hours. Practice and patience, Margaret said softly. And maybe she just needed a woman's touch. Babies know the difference, especially ones who've just lost their mothers. They're looking for that softness, that gentle certainty. You'll learn it too, Mr. Brennan. You just need time. Emma's eyes began to droop as she fed, her tiny fist curling against Margaret's finger. The trust in that small gesture brought tears to Margaret's eyes. She had spent the entire day being rejected, being made to feel worthless because of how she looked, because society had decided her body made her undesirable. But this baby didn't care about any of that. This baby just needed love and care, things Margaret had in abundance. When Emma finished eating, Margaret lifted her to her shoulder and patted her back gently until a small burp emerged. The baby's head drooped against her neck, finally peaceful. Finally safe. She's asleep, Thomas whispered, as if he couldn't quite believe it. She'll sleep for a few hours now. She was exhausted from crying. But she'll wake in the night for another feeding. Babies this age eat every 3 or 4 hours, day and night. It's hard work, Mr. Brennan, but it gets easier. Margaret stood carefully and looked around for somewhere to lay the baby down. Thomas quickly led her to a small bedroom where a wooden cradle sat beside an unmade bed. The room still smelled faintly of lavender and sickness, traces of the woman who had died here just days ago. Margaret placed Emma gently in the cradle, tucking a clean blanket around her. The baby's face was serene now, her breathing deep and steady. For a moment, both adults stood there watching her, two strangers bound together by circumstance and a tiny life that depended on them both. Thank you, Thomas said finally, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't knocked on my door tonight. Margaret turned to face him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Beneath the exhaustion and grief, he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 at most. Sorrow had aged him prematurely. We helped each other tonight, she replied. Now let me help you more. That kitchen needs cleaning, you need food in your belly, and this house needs a fire before we all freeze. I'll work for my keep, Mr. Brennan. You won't regret letting me stay. Dawn broke gray and cold over the valley, but inside the Brennan house, warmth had returned. Margaret had stayed awake most of the night, tending to Emma's feedings, cleaning the kitchen until it gleamed, and keeping the fire burning steady. When Thomas emerged from his bedroom just after sunrise, he stopped short at the threshold, staring at the transformation. The dishes were washed and stacked neatly on the shelves. The floors had been swept clean. Fresh bread sat cooling on the table, its aroma filling every corner of the house. The hearth crackled with a healthy fire, and in the rocking chair beside it, Margaret dozed with Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. Thomas felt something twist painfully in his chest. The scene looked so domestic, so normal, so much like what his life was supposed to be. But the woman in the chair wasn't his wife Catherine. Catherine was buried on the hill behind the house beneath a simple wooden cross, and this strange woman who had appeared in the storm was now occupying the space Catherine should have filled. Guilt washed over him, but so did relief. Overwhelming, shameful relief that he wasn't facing this alone anymore. Margaret stirred and opened her eyes, immediately alert. Mr. Brennan. Good morning. Emma woke twice in the night but fed well each time. She's much calmer today. I think she was just hungry and scared yesterday, nothing more serious. Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice. He moved toward the table and saw that Margaret had set out breakfast for him as well, simple but hearty. Bread, butter, eggs, and hot tea. When had she found time to do all this? You should have woken me, he said finally. For the night feedings. She's my responsibility. You needed sleep more than you needed to stumble around in the dark, Margaret replied matter-of-factly. Besides, I was awake anyway. Old habit from raising my siblings. My body knows infant hours better than regular ones. They ate in awkward silence, the only sound Emma's occasional sleep sighs. Thomas found himself stealing glances at Margaret, trying to understand who this woman really was. She moved with quiet efficiency, never wasting motion, never complaining. Her round face held a kind of settled determination, as if she had long ago accepted the world's cruelty and decided to be kind anyway. Tell me about your siblings, Thomas said, surprising himself. The ones you raised. Margaret's expression softened. 6 of them, all younger than me. I was 13 when my mother died, bringing the youngest into the world. My father was a good man but broken by grief. He worked himself to exhaustion in the fields and left me to manage the house and children. I learned fast because I had to. How to stop crying with a song, how to cure colic with warm compresses, how to stretch a single chicken into soup for 8 mouths. That's a heavy burden for a child, Thomas observed. Children carry what they must, Margaret said simply. We all do. When my father died 5 years later, my older cousins took the younger children. They were willing to split up the family to help, but nobody wanted to take me along with my siblings. I was already too big, too expensive to feed, too unmarriageable. So they scattered my brothers and sisters across 3 different households, and I've been working my way from place to place ever since, trying to save enough money to bring them back together again. The pain in her voice was carefully controlled, but Thomas heard it anyway. You've been alone for how long? 7 years, Margaret said. I'm 25 now. I've worked as a maid, a cook, a farmhand when they'd have me. I send what money I can to my siblings, little bits here and there to let them know I haven't forgotten them. But it's never enough. It's never anywhere close to enough. Thomas set down his teacup carefully. What happened yesterday? Why were you knocking on doors in a storm? Margaret's jaw tightened. The family I worked for decided they needed to cut expenses. The lady of the house said I ate too much for what I was worth, that I was setting a bad example for her daughters by being comfortable with my size. She dismissed me without references, without even my last week's wages. Said I should be grateful she'd employed me at all, given how I look. Anger flared hot in Thomas's chest. That's cruel and unjust. That's the world, Margaret corrected gently. At least, that's the world for women like me. I'm not bitter, Mr. Brennan. I know what I am and what I'm not. I'm not pretty, I'm not slim, I'm not the kind of woman men want to court or marry. But I am capable, I am strong, and I am kind. Those things have to count for something. Before Thomas could respond, Emma began to fuss. Margaret immediately shifted into action, checking the baby, preparing another bottle, moving through the routine with practiced ease. Thomas watched and learned, seeing how she supported Emma's head, how she tested the milk temperature, how she spoke softly to the infant throughout. I need to be honest with you, Thomas said as Margaret fed his daughter. I can't pay you much. The farm barely breaks even most years, and with Catherine's funeral expenses and the doctor's bills before she died, I'm nearly broke. I can offer you room and board, and whatever small wages I can scrape together, but it won't be much. It won't be what you deserve. Margaret met his eyes steadily. I don't need much, Mr. Brennan. I need a roof that doesn't leak, food enough to keep working, and the chance to save a little money each month. If you can provide those things, I'll tend Emma, keep your house, cook your meals, and help however else you need. We'll call it a fair trade and leave it at that. Thomas felt the weight of the decision settling over him. Taking Margaret in meant trusting a stranger with his daughter, with his home, with his grief-raw heart. But it also meant survival. It meant Emma would be cared for properly. It meant he could work the farm without constantly worrying that his daughter was crying herself sick while he was in the fields. All right, he said firmly. You'll stay. We'll work out the details as we go, but you'll stay. You'll have the small room off the kitchen. It's not much, but it's warm and private. We'll share meals and responsibilities. And Margaret. She looked up from Emma's feeding, her expression guarded. Thank you, Thomas said simply. For everything you've already done. For knocking on my door. For not giving up. Something shifted in Margaret's face, a crack in the careful wall she kept around herself. Her eyes grew bright with unshed tears, but she blinked them back quickly. Thank you for opening it, Mr. Brennan. For seeing past what everyone else sees. For giving me a chance. Neither of them spoke after that, but something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, an agreement, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. The arrangement was practical, nothing more. But in that moment, it felt like something greater. It felt like salvation for two lost souls who had found each other in the storm. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm of quiet domesticity. Margaret transformed the Brennan household from chaos into order, and Emma thrived under her constant care. The baby smiled now, cooed when Margaret sang, and slept through most nights. Thomas found himself able to work the farm properly again, knowing his daughter was safe. Life settled into something that almost resembled peace. Then the neighbors started talking. It began with Mrs. Hutchinson from the neighboring farm, who appeared at the door one morning with a basket of preserves and a mouthful of concern disguised as charity. Margaret answered the knock, Emma on her hip, flour dusting her apron from the morning's baking. "Oh," Mrs. Hutchinson said, her smile freezing in place. "You must be the new help Thomas hired. I thought I'd stop by to check on the poor dear man and his motherless baby. How is Thomas managing?" "Mr. Brennan is well, thank you," Margaret replied politely, recognizing the probe for what it was. "He's out mending the fence in the north pasture. Would you like me to fetch him?" No, that's quite all right." Mrs. Hutchinson's eyes roamed over Margaret's figure with undisguised disapproval, then swept past her into the house. "My goodness, you've certainly made yourself comfortable here, haven't you? Living right in the house and all. Most hired help stays in separate quarters. More proper that way, you understand. Less opportunity for gossip." Margaret felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. "The room off the kitchen suits my needs perfectly, Mrs. Hutchinson. I'm close enough to hear Emma if she wakes in the night, which is necessary for her care." Of course," the older woman said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I'm sure your intentions are perfectly innocent. It's just that people talk, you know. A young woman living alone with a widower so soon after his wife's death. It doesn't look right, no matter how practical the arrangement might be. Some might wonder if Thomas is thinking clearly, taking in a stranger off the road. Especially one who looks quite capable of taking advantage of a grieving man's vulnerability." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Margaret felt anger rising in her throat, but before she could respond, Thomas's voice cut across the yard. "Mrs. Hutchinson, what a surprise." He strode toward them, his face set in hard lines. "I see you've met Miss Hayes. She's been an absolute godsend to Emma and me. I don't know what I would have done without her these past weeks." Mrs. Hutchinson turned to him with exaggerated concern. "Oh, Thomas, dear, I'm so glad to hear she's been helpful. I just worry about appearances, you understand. People in town are starting to wonder if perhaps the arrangement is a bit too familiar, given your recent loss. Catherine's barely been gone a month, and here you are with another woman running your household, sleeping under your roof." Thomas's jaw clenched visibly. Catherine would want Emma cared for properly. She would want our daughter safe, healthy, and loved. Miss Hayes provides all of that. What people in town think about my household arrangements is frankly none of their concern or yours. "I'm only trying to help," Mrs. Hutchinson protested, placing a hand dramatically over her heart. "You know how cruel gossip can be. They're saying she's trying to worm her way into Catherine's place, that she's using the baby to trap you into something improper. Some are even suggesting that you hired her because she's desperate enough to accept certain additional expectations that a respectable woman would refuse." Margaret felt as if she'd been slapped. The implication was crystal clear and utterly vile. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Thomas stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Stop. Right there." Each word was carved from ice. "Margaret Hayes is a decent, hard-working woman who has shown my daughter more genuine care in 3 weeks than you've shown in your entire life. She works from dawn until well past dark. She's never asked for anything beyond fair wages for fair work. And if I hear one more word of this filth coming from your mouth or anyone else's, I will make it very clear to the entire valley exactly what kind of person spread such poison." Mrs. Hutchinson's face turned scarlet. "Well, I was only trying to warn you that people are talking. If you want to ruin your reputation by keeping that oversized woman in your house, that's your business. But don't come crying when decent folk start avoiding you at church and in town." She turned on her heel and marched back to her wagon, leaving the basket of preserves on the porch as if it had been contaminated. Margaret and Thomas stood in silence, watching her leave, the dust from her wagon wheels hanging in the air like the accusations she'd left behind. "I'm sorry," Margaret said quietly, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door. If my presence is causing problems, I can leave. I can find somewhere else to go." "Absolutely not," Thomas said fiercely, turning to face her. "You're not going anywhere. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen, but I'll be damned if I let small-minded gossips dictate what happens in my own home. You've done nothing wrong, Margaret. Nothing. But your reputation." "My reputation means nothing compared to Emma's well-being," Thomas interrupted. "And nothing compared to treating a good person with the respect they deserve. Let them talk. Let them judge. We know the truth of what happens here. We know this arrangement is proper and necessary. That's all that matters." Margaret looked down at Emma, who was reaching for her face with tiny, trusting fingers. The baby had no idea that the world was already judging the woman who cared for her, already trying to tear apart the fragile stability they'd built. Tears blurred Margaret's vision. "I just wanted to help," she whispered. "I just wanted a chance to do something good." Thomas's expression softened. He reached out hesitantly, then placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You are doing something good. You're keeping my daughter alive and healthy. You're holding this household together. Don't let cruel people take that away from you. Don't let them make you feel less than what you are." Margaret nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. But she knew the truth. Mrs. Hutchinson's visit was only the beginning. The gossip would spread, would grow, would twist until their simple arrangement became something sordid in the minds of everyone around them. She could feel the judgment pressing in from all sides, waiting to condemn them both for daring to survive in a way that didn't fit society's narrow expectations. That night, after Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, Margaret sat by the fire and allowed herself to cry. Not for the cruelty she'd endured, she'd lived with that her whole life. But for the fear that she might have to leave this place, this baby, this fragile piece she'd found. And for the growing, impossible feeling in her heart that maybe, just maybe, she wanted to stay forever. Winter descended on the valley with bitter cold and heavy snow. The gossip had indeed spread, growing more vicious with each retelling. Invitations stopped coming. People crossed the street when Thomas came to town. The minister himself appeared at the door one Sunday morning, his face grave with righteous concern. "Thomas, the congregation is worried about your soul," Reverend Mitchell began without preamble. "Living in sin with that woman, letting her raise your daughter while Catherine's memory is still fresh. It's unseemly. It's wrong. You need to either marry the girl to make it proper or send her away before you're both completely ruined." Margaret listened from the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She waited for Thomas's response, knowing it would determine everything. "With respect, Reverend, there is no sin happening in this house," Thomas said coldly. "Miss Hayes is my employee. She has her own room. We maintain proper boundaries. My daughter is thriving under her care. That should be all that matters to anyone, including you." "But people are talking, Thomas. They see how she looks at you, how you defend her. They say she's bewitched you somehow, that she's using the child to manipulate you into forgetting your dear Catherine. And frankly, a woman of her size and situation, she must be desperate enough to try anything to secure a husband." Margaret squeezed her eyes shut. There it was again. The assumption that her body made her desperate, calculating, willing to do anything for security. The assumption that no man would want her unless he was tricked or trapped. "Get out." Thomas's voice was quiet but lethal. "Get out of my house right now." "Thomas, I'm trying to help you see reason." "I said get out." Thomas roared. "Take your judgment and your cruelty and your blind, stupid prejudice and get off my property. And you can tell your congregation that if they have a problem with how I run my household, they can take it up with God, because I'm done listening to them." The door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Margaret heard Thomas's heavy breathing in the silence that followed, heard him lean against the door as if holding the whole world back. She stepped into the doorway, Emma in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Thomas, this has to stop," she said, her voice breaking. "You're losing everything because of me. Your community, your church, your standing. I can't let you sacrifice all of that. Emma needs you to be accepted here, to be part of this town. She needs you to be able to hold your head up. I have to leave." Thomas turned to face her, and Margaret was stunned by the raw emotion in his eyes. "No. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks, Margaret. About what matters and what doesn't. About what Catherine would actually want versus what these hypocrites claim to want for me. And I've realized something important. He crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of her. When Catherine was dying, she made me promise something. She made me promise that I would find happiness again, that I wouldn't let grief destroy me, that I would give Emma a mother's love even if it couldn't be hers. I thought she meant I should remarry eventually, find some nice woman from town who would tolerate taking on another woman's child. Margaret's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Thomas. But these past months with you, I've realized something. You already give Emma a mother's love. You already bring life back into this house. You already make everything better just by being here. And somewhere along the way, watching you sing to my daughter, watching you turn this house into a home again, watching you face cruelty with grace and kindness, I stopped seeing you as just my employee. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheek. I started seeing you as someone I could spend my life with. Someone I want to spend my life with. Not because I'm desperate or bewitched or trying to replace Catherine. But because you're remarkable, Margaret Hayes. You're strong and kind and loving, and you make me want to be better than I am. Margaret was shaking her head, tears flowing faster now. You can't mean this. I'm not pretty, I'm not what men want. You're just grateful because I help with Emma. That's not the same as actual feelings. I'm not asking you to believe I'm in love with you, Thomas said honestly. We barely know each other, and I'm still grieving Catherine. I probably will be for years. But I am asking you to believe that I care about you, that I respect you, and that I want you in my life. Not just as Emma's caretaker, but as my partner. My wife, if you'll have me. Margaret felt the world tilt beneath her feet. You're asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to stay, Thomas said firmly. Properly, legally, as my wife. Not because of gossip or pressure, but because I genuinely want you here. Because I think we could build something good together, something real. It might not be a passionate romance, at least not at first. But it could be a true partnership, a real family. That's worth more than passion anyway. People will say terrible things, Margaret whispered. They'll say I trapped you, that I took advantage of your grief, that you settled for me because you had no other choice. Let them say whatever they want, Thomas replied. Their opinions don't pay my bills or raise my daughter or warm my house. You do all of those things and more. The question isn't what they think. The question is what you want, Margaret. Do you want to stay? Do you want to build a life here with Emma and me? Because if you do, I promise I'll spend every day trying to make sure you never regret it. Margaret looked down at Emma, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. This tiny life that had become so precious to her, so central to her world. Then she looked back at Thomas, at this broken, honest man who was offering her everything she'd ever dreamed of and never thought she'd have. I want to stay, she said, her voice barely audible. More than anything, I want to stay. Thomas's face broke into the first real smile she'd seen from him. Then stay. Marry me next week. We'll do it quietly, just us and Emma and whatever witnesses we need. We'll show this town that their judgment means nothing. We'll show them that families come in all forms, that love isn't always what it looks like in storybooks, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. He pulled her gently into his arms, careful not to crush Emma between them, and Margaret felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace. Belonging. Home. Not because she was thin or pretty or conventional. But because she was herself, and that was finally, miraculously enough. Nobody wanted a fat girl, she said softly against his chest. But I could tend the baby. And now you'll never have to leave, Thomas whispered back. Welcome home, Margaret. Welcome home. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white. But inside the Brennan house, warmth bloomed. A motherless baby slept peacefully in the arms of a woman who loved her. A widower found hope in unexpected places. And a woman who had been rejected by the world finally found where she belonged. Their story wasn't perfect. The town continued to gossip for months. Some people never accepted them. But Margaret and Thomas built their life anyway, day by day, choice by choice. They raised Emma together, and eventually 2 more children joined their family. They worked the farm side by side. They laughed, argued, grieved, and slowly, gradually, fell genuinely in love. Years later, when people asked Thomas why he married Margaret, he would smile and say the same thing every time. Because she knocked on my door during a storm and saved my daughter's life. Because she turned out to be exactly what we needed. And because sometimes the best answer to life's hardest questions is simply, stay. And Margaret would add, holding his hand tight, and because when nobody else wanted me, he said then stay and meant it. That was enough. That was everything.